then that stress is not going to let me digest food well. It's going to completely disallow me to have hormonal balance, because anytime stress hormones are increased, hormonal balance is an impossibility. I'm going to just say that again. Anytime that stress hormone is increased, it's an impossibility to have hormonal balance. And so if my stress level is high because of my belief system driving my actions, then I could change my exercise routine and diet till the cows come home and afterwards, and that won't cure my problem.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to this episode of Her Daily Rhythm, the podcast dedicated to empowering you to live in harmony with your mind, body, and spirit. I'm your host, Natalie Smythe, a nutritionist and naturopath along the journey with FemVed, a holistic wellness platform dedicated to supporting women from menstruation to menopause. And in this episode, I am privileged to meet and interview Dr. Welch. Dr. Welch has been a lifelong student of life and medicine. She has practiced Ayurveda, is licensed as a doctor of Oriental medicine, and authored a multitude of books on achieving optimal health through Ayurveda, Chinese medicine, and Western science. In this episode, we explore the interconnectedness of stress, hormonal balance, and personal growth through a lens that blends Eastern and Western medicine perspectives, highlighting the impacts of belief systems and stress on health, and the importance of aligning your inner essence to the whole. This was a beautiful episode, and I was so honored to meet with Dr. Welch and be in her presence and offer her wisdom to you. There's definitely so many key takeaways as how to live your best possible life, and as she says, your life gets better and better. Tune in and, like always, let me know what you love, what you want to hear more of, and how can we best support you. I've only been practicing for 15 years, and I noticed from my forebearers, now wellness and people are interested, and it's becoming common topical conversation now, Ayurveda and maybe Oriental medicine. But for my forebearers, and I can imagine when you started, it was a courageous act to study what you do and create space to do what you do. So I wonder if you could maybe start by sharing a little bit about your personal journey, because I think that we don't get into this journey by accident.
Thank you, Natalie. First of all, thank you for being here, and thank you everybody who's listening for your precious time. You used the word courage here, Natalie, and I want to bring that in to exactly what you're talking about, how we get into these things. I think we get into meaningful things through the doorway of courage. And meaningful things, one of the things that may come out in this conversation is the amount of courage it takes to live the lives we really want to be living. And so when I first started into this, there were things that didn't really take courage. I was just curious, but what they demanded of me later was courage. So what I mean by that is how I first got into women's health, because there's many things that I'm into, but I think your question is around women's health. I had studied both Ayurveda and Chinese medicine, and both of those systems, the authors of the ancient texts that talk about these systems that we rely on to this day were men. And they didn't talk about hormones. And in fact, the whole hormonal health conversation is a pretty new one in terms of the whole scope of time, right? The first hormones weren't really discovered until 1902. So this is just a 120 something year conversation that's been going on. And the ancient texts didn't talk about hormones at all. What they gave us was different lenses through which to view reality. And so what I trusted at that, when I was first in practice and all these women were coming to me with saying, hey, my hormones are out of whack, they didn't really know what that meant. And I didn't really know what that meant, even with the background of Chinese medicine and Ayurveda, because Ayurveda and Chinese medicine don't talk about hormones. But what I trusted was that if I learned what I could about hormones from a Western scientific point of view, that I would be able to translate them into Chinese medicine or Ayurvedic medicine language, and that would help me understand them in a different way. You know, from a Western point of view, we tend to look at hormones like, okay, there's estrogen, there's these different kinds of estrogens. This one is made here and it goes there in the body and has this effect. There's testosterone, it's made here, it goes there, it has this effect. There's progesterone, it's made here, it goes there, it has that effect. Same with cortisol, adrenaline, and so forth. And so that's very useful, but it doesn't, that Western way of looking at things, pinpointing things, describing them, describing what they do, misses the contextual importance of these substances. What context do these substances exist in? And so when I studied the hormones a lot from a Western point of view, and sure enough, a way of understanding them became clear from an Eastern medicine point of view. And so when I kind of saw that, I couldn't unsee it. It was so clear, and I thought, this is so clear and simple. Could this really be true? And I went back to the drawing board. I was still in private practice at that point, and worked with each patient with this understanding, and it just got more and more reinforced. So that was my entryway into the understanding of women's health and hormones from a Chinese and Ayurvedic medicine point of view. And the courage part was, what it taught me is we really have to be, and we can go into this more at some point if we want, we really have to be courageous about living the lives we want to live. Otherwise, the context of our lives being stressful creates an impossibility of hormonal balance. So that's where the courage comes in, is each day waking up and having the courage to live in alignment with my innermost essence.
Mm, mm. That's really beautiful. And I guess I haven't planned to go in this direction, but I think I have to piece it into here, is that you do run a satsang, a community. And I wonder how that impacts or influences the work at large, and how important you've noticed maybe the evolution of that with the satsang.
Yeah, well, first of all, I don't run the Satsang community,
Okay.
but I'm part. The one of the projects that I've been involved with for a while is satsangam.net. You can find it at satsangam.net, not .com. And that's looking at the context in which Eastern subjects exists to help us understand our subjects better. So it's good company. And the word satsang, there's different kinds of satsang that I'm involved in. So satsangam is one group, and I also have other satsangs. Sat means truth, and sangha is confluence. So confluence of people, seekers of truth, is and listening to truth. That's what a satsang is. And it's interesting you should go right there, because when I was 8 years old, I received a letter from my guru from India, who I hadn't met yet. He was going to come to the US, but a friend of mine was going to see him. And as a child, I was very interested in the mysteries of life. And I wrote this letter in child scrawl to my guru, sent it with this friend who was going to India, and received back a reply, which I still have to this day, some 50-ish years later. It's, I would say, my most prized possession. And in that letter, he said some things. He wrote as if I was a human, not a child. And of course, children are human, but he must have known I was a child in the child's scrawl that I wrote the letter in. But he wrote
Mm-hmm.
back things that to this day are very important to me. And in that, he wrote, be in good company and go to satsang. good company
Mm.
makes a man great. And so it's been a directive in my life. And so being in good company, like I am with you today, Natalie, where we're
Mm.
searching for the truth, all of these things are satsang. And so having satsang be a container in my life, uh, a, if not a constant, a consistent presence in my life has been very important.
Mm. It's really interesting because I had this conversation with somebody else that was in a similar ilk as you. So somebody that is very expert in the same uh, similar lineage, and they also had that moment when they were a child of deeper inquiry into the mysteries of life, but also found their guru very early, and that was so lucky that you were able to trust it and almost had that soul belief that that was your compass. And I know that a lot of us do, and as you know with children, is they really are already connected, but culture and our modern day lifestyle, it pulls us in all directions. So I guess, how do if you don't have a guru, or maybe you don't have a mentor like that, how do you stay on that path of truth? You have mentioned, the satsang, the confluence, the people. You said it right there. But what would be your advice to listeners? Is that maybe they're in their late 20s, 30s, and they're in the wind, but they want it.
Yeah, yeah. Well, a couple things. One is, well, I am so not an expert in anything. I'm
Yeah,
just a consistent
it's
student and seeker myself. But
mm,
what my guru used to say is the true guru is not the external human being. The true
mm,
guru is within. Is that all religions talk about this, from Christianity, the kingdom of God is within you. All religions, my guru taught, and kind of teased this out of all religions, that they all say that the knowledge is within. And so there he would talk about, if you're first of all, if you're when you find the guru, it's really someone who's going to turn you into yourself. It's to turn you to look within yourself. And so when we can peep inside and go to the deepest place we can of our innermost essence, that's really the true guru. An external guru who's really perfected that art themselves is an incredible boon and boost in that direction, but they're never going to attach you to something different than what is inside you. um, so they turn you from looking out for guidance to looking inward to guidance. And so I would say, if we don't have an external guru to help with that, that what we can all have is the ability to have a daily practice where we look within as deep as we can, to be able to hear that inner essence and touch that inner essence, and rely on that inner essence for the actions, the thoughts, the words that we engage in, that to always use that as a touchstone as much as possible. And we forget, we're all
mm,
very forgetful. But my guru wrote this one beautiful song that whose chorus is, if we keep walking while being in remembrance, the destination will come to us by itself. So we're all
mm,
interested in having a guru or something in order to know where to go, what to do, how to move forward. But he said that if you keep remembering that true guru, that innermost essence, as as we walk, our fate, our destination comes to us by itself.
mm. So I guess to go back to a daily practice, for example, what would be your suggestion?
Well, my guru gave me a meditation practice, but it was also very clear that unless you're really equipped to do that and directed to do that by your guru, you should not teach other people how to meditate and do that. However, the subject of pratyahara in India is so beautiful, which is a beginning to turn awareness from the outside to the inside, and that there's all kinds of pratyahara um, practices that we can do, whether it's breathing and beginning to turn the attention and the awareness from outer things to the inner terrain. All of those practices, we don't have to call them meditation. They could just be instruments to achieve pratyahara. So whether it's yoga nidra or quiet contemplation or closing our eyes or doing a nadi shodhana, alternate nostril breathing, gentle thing, where we're kind of internal. Any one of those things in a morning daily practice can be very useful. And I want to talk maybe just for a second about this term pratyahara. It's so interesting. Prati means against, and ahara is often translated as food, but it's also translated as the urge to fetch. So pratyahara is against the urge to fetch. And
Mm.
so when we're sitting quietly, what we can notice is that there's always an urge to fetch information, a drink, a little bit of tea, a cookie, some food. There's this urge to fetch that's always bringing us outside, company, something external. And so pratyahara is, sitting quietly and resisting that urge to fetch, turning that attention from outward to inward. Not an easy job.
Yeah, it's certainly not. Just for example, I've been noticing myself recently, and I can't go for a minute without listening to something. I'll wake up, I'll listen to, I'll listen to a meditation, then I'll go to the shower, I'll listen to a podcast, you know, and there is not a minute in my day that I'm not listening to something, even though it's the seeker of knowledge. And so I'm seeking answers, but the answers, as you say, are within. All I need is to walk in nature with no headphones.
Mm.
Um, and I guess to go deeper into that, but is the wellness movement that we're seeing at the moment, which is green pharmacy. So there's a solution and a tech and an app for everything. So some would argue it's better than going to the doctors and all the pharmaceutical drugs, and being aware of the food that we're eating with all of the chemicals and things, but it's just replaced with a nice green label on it instead. So I wonder, maybe could you speak about let's go into the practices of Ayurveda for building, if we're building the inner terrain with our quiet focus and contemplation and that stillness, and then what is the next step up to support our systems?
Mm. Well, I'm not entirely sure I understand the question, but let me talk about it for a minute and see if I'm getting in the ballpark here. But all these apps that are helping us figure out what to eat and what to do and what kind of exercise is right and this and that. All of those things are important. And yet, let me go back and tie this into the conversation about hormones for a minute. When I started figuring out this balance when I started seeing, I should say, rather than figuring out, seeing this balance of qualities in a woman's life. It's in everybody's life, but just in terms of women's health, this balance of qualities and what affects it, and how do we achieve balance and recognize imbalance. Everything affects balance. Everything. What the temperature is today, what the humidity level is today, what time of year it is, so that we know how many hours of light versus dark we have in a day, what we eat, what we drink, who we talk with, what our emotions are. All of these things are part of Ayurveda and Chinese medicine in terms of looking at what influences us and which qualities are then therefore being increased or decreased in our systems, in our organisms. And when we look at that, we certainly, what we eat and what we do are all very important things. And we can work with those things and manipulate those things and eat the right foods and have the right exercise routine and all this stuff and still have an imbalance in our spirits, in our nervous systems, in our emotions. And if we keep going down the rabbit holes too far of diet and exercise routines, what we're doing is we are kind of following this belief that those are going to hold the answers. And they will help. But if the problem didn't start in the diet, if this problem started in the way I see reality, the way I view reality, what I think is real success in a life, what I believe, if those things are what are driving me to eat certain things or have certain exercise routines or certain relationships, those fundamental belief systems, if those are driving me to live in such a way that I don't really want to be living, and that's causing this context of stress or tension or feeling trapped in this life, then that stress is not going to let me digest food well. It's going to completely disallow me to have hormonal balance, because anytime stress hormones are increased, hormonal balance is an impossibility. I'm going to just say that again. Anytime that stress hormone is increased, it's an impossibility to have hormonal balance. And so if my stress level is high because of my belief system driving my actions, then I could change my exercise routine and diet till the cows come home and afterwards, and that won't cure my problem. So after a long time in my life of working with herbs and remedies and diet and lifestyle and so forth, concurrent with looking at belief system and what motivates us, I have found in my experience that the more important part, the part that I'm focusing on more now as I get older, I'm 55 going on 56 soon, and what I'm focusing on now more is the belief system underneath the actions and the foods and the relationships, and how that affects us, and how can we allow that to transform with the medicine of consciousness and attention and awareness on that.
What would you say to somebody that is starting to experience some menstrual disturbance or painful periods, and they're getting migraines? So symptoms of a hormonal imbalance, but they've been going about life, going down the trajectory, and then they start to experience more chronic symptoms. What would be your first piece of advice?
Well, I have a couple. I mean, the first one is, please, and not to be self-promoting, but there's a whole body of understanding of why we start experiencing the symptoms we start, whether they're irregular periods or heavy periods or painful periods or tender breasts or migraines with the period or PMS. There's a whole very easy to understand pathway for this to happen. And I taught about this for a long time, 15, 20 years, and then recorded it. And my Women's Health and Hormones Part 1 class is 11 hours, and it's entertaining and packed. And that really gives a very clear indication of why certain things happen, a very clear pathway of understanding. So the first thing I would say is, if you have the time, please take that. And if you don't have the resources, reach out to me and we will help you make that happen, because I really wish every woman knew that. without taking 11 hours and
Mm.
just saying, if you're having hormonal issues starting, please see somebody who's
Mm.
trained in some of this, because um, deal with it. You don't have to have that. And uh, if something is starting in your teens, that's a bit of a different situation than if something is starting in your 20s. And if it's starting in your 20s, that's a little different than it's starting in your 30s or 40s or 50s. Some are kind of more genetic, some have more lifestyle and diet implications, some have more um, belief system motivations, creating stress, creating this imbalance kind of thing. It's worth investigation. And some have to do with perimenopausal changes. And one thing I would say around that, if you start having heavier periods in your 40s, don't think, oh, and I'm saying this from personal experience as well as experience with patients and so forth, don't think, oh, I'm in my mid 40s. I'm going to go through menopause at any minute. I'm just going to wait until menopause and let that take care of it. No, please work with it and find out what the cause is, because the earlier you do that, the easier it is to address that with natural remedies and lifestyle and diet changes and changes to our perspective and things like that. So there's different reasons someone would have any one of these symptoms, but a lot of the causes are similar, and it's useful to get educated about that.
And could you highlight a couple of the causes? I actually have bookmarked your course because it's so invaluable of knowledge, particularly to have the traditional Chinese medicine, the Ayurvedic practice, and everything like that is invaluable because that takes years of study. So I look forward to studying that.
If you want just one or two things, here's one: the medicine of subtraction.
Mm-hmm.
Consider in our lives, what one thing do we hate doing the most that we keep doing?
Mm.
And how can I get rid of that? Like,
Mm.
really
Mm.
check in my innermost essence. Is this thing that I'm doing in alignment with my innermost essence? It's going to be three possible answers.
Mm.
Yes, it is. So that's going to have ramifications. We'll go back to the ramifications in a minute. But the three possible answers from that innermost essence is yes, this is the right action. No, this isn't the right action. Or nothing. It doesn't say anything. And
Mm.
there's that's where the courage comes in, is okay, once I hear that from my innermost essence, the only question is, do I have the courage to do the thing, even if it's hard, and continue to do it? Do I have the courage to stop doing it if it's really not the right thing? Or if the innermost essence isn't really giving an answer, do I have the courage to wait until it does, until something becomes clear? So I would say the first thing is listening to the innermost essence and going in according, having the courage to go in alignment with that. And the second thing is medicine of subtraction. Get rid of the things that aren't right to be doing. And if we go back to that yes, no, or nothing thing, if we are considering whether or not to do something and we can't hear, can't hear the voice of the innermost essence, that's where sort of a daily practice of listening to it comes in. So I would say the medicine of subtraction, have the courage to go in alignment with your innermost essence and have a daily practice of listening to that innermost essence. And in terms of that yes or no, if the innermost essence says, no, don't do this, it can take an enormous amount of courage to stop
Mm.
doing that. And I would say that there's a couple things that have helped me with this. There's this old Chuang-Tzu, the Taoist philosopher Chuang-Tzu story that I'm going to paraphrase and probably butcher a little bit, but it goes something like this. There's a bottomless pit. There's two people hanging out at the top of the bottomless pit. and there's a job they have to do. They both have to jump in. It's a game. That's the one rule. They both have to jump in. So the first guy just jumps in. And the second guy is so freaked out. Oh my God, I'm going to jump in. This is so scary. And he calls after the guy who jumped in. He's like, how come you're not afraid? You jumped in. How come you're not afraid? And he said, because it's bottomless. And I think when we are going to do something, it's like jumping off into that cliff. When we're stopping doing something, or we're doing something that takes courage, it's like jumping off that cliff, and we feel like something's going to end, something is going to break, something is going to die. This is very scary, but we do it, and it's bottomless. There's not a bang, so but not all of us can take that leap. I couldn't take that leap when there were certain things I saw that I needed to kind of shut down because they weren't fitting anymore. I couldn't do that all at once. So just take a step. Take that step and see what happens, how things rearrange. Does it get worse or does it get better? And tend to get better. And so then that would give me the courage to take another little step in that direction. And I was able to do it in little steps. And I think that's very useful to do it in little steps.
And I think that courage angle is different from discipline, because when we know we should do something is different than, okay, I have to do this for my evolution, or not even have to, but it's going to make life so much easier. But I think we don't think cyclically. We're afraid of deaths and beginnings, and deaths and beginning, and as the cycles of life, because your hormones are different in your teens and your 20s and 30s, 40s, 50s, or each decade, aren't they? So noticing that you're different each cycle. So I want to go back to when you were mentioning menopause and perimenopause and so much, because we're receiving a lot of knowledge in this, even in corporates. Some people are receiving support around menopause and even time off as well. And it's getting earlier, and then that's causing a lot of chaos and anxiety in the media, and everyone, as you said, thinks, okay, I'm 38, I'm about to go into menopause, which just heightens your nervous system. So I wonder if you could maybe speak about what you're seeing with perimenopause, menopause, and or society then menopause.
Yeah, it's interesting. In general, the understanding is the later you go through menopause, the healthier that an indication that is. And not everybody is going through menopause earlier, but it's definitely many people do go through it very early. And perimenopause is really what we see earlier. Menopause is earlier for a lot of people, but it's also perimenopause can start really early. And what I'm seeing with this, I'm just going to reinforce what I've already said about it is impossible to have hormonal balance in the face of stress. So what is causing that stress? And what we see, okay, so it'll be helpful to back up here for a second and see what Eastern medicine, how it helps us look at this. So how it helps us look at this is there's different perspectives that Eastern medicine, different lenses that they give us to view different phenomena. If we're looking at hormonal balance, which is underlying all these changes that we start seeing that you're talking about, early menopause, difficult perimenopause, when we're looking at that hormonal balance, we can understand that by through the lens of duality, the language of duality. So everything in the world, Eastern medicine tells us, can be analyzed using the concept of duality. And interestingly, this concept of duality is talked about exactly the same way in Chinese medicine and Ayurveda, which is that on one side, we have yin, in Chinese medicine called Brahmana or Santarpana in Ayurvedic medicine, and that polar side of things is governs grounding, nourishing, cooling, calming kind of energies and qualities. The opposite of that, the other polar side, is yang, which in Ayurveda is Langana or Apatarpana. And those yang qualities are stimulating, motivating, lightening, heating. So these are powerful opposites that we can use to describe anything in the universe. Everything has a little bit of both sides, but some have a preponderance of one or the other. So if we apply this to hormones in a woman's body, we see that the hormones progesterone and estrogen are more of the building and nourishing and calming side of things. And cortisol and adrenaline are more of the stimulating, activating, motivating side of things. And so when we look at this and we see that the yin hormones, the calming, nourishing, building hormones, are very powerfully present until 35, and at 35 they begin to decrease, and at 50-ish, around menopause, they decrease a lot. If during that time from 35 through menopause, if the cortisol and adrenaline, which is to say the stress in our lives, stays the same, but the buffering hormones that balance that, the sex hormones that balance that, are beginning to reduce, then that is the time where we have increasingly more symptoms that show up in a powerful way. And so what we can do is look at what is causing us stress in our lives, to reduce that stress, to bring that balance closer together and relieve some of those symptoms.
And I also was having some discussions. Sometimes people that experience maybe a more challenging or longer menopause, a lot of those emotions, so more metaphysical, all of the emotions that we haven't maybe dealt with in earlier life or transformed, it's an opportunity to transform them as well.
Yeah, and you know, that's sort of a euphemism. It's an
Yeah,
opportunity to transfer
yeah.
them. It hits you like a ton of
Thanks.
bricks
Yeah.
sometimes, right?
Yeah. Thanks. I mean, how do you deal with that? Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So it helps to prepare for that a little bit if we can, but if it hits us and we haven't prepared, it's not too late. But it's time to really pay attention to our habits and our thought processes. Yeah.
And I suppose, how do you measure stress? Basically, how somebody is presenting to you?
Yeah. Well, you know, how do you measure stress? We all know we all know
Mm,
when we're stressed. Although
mm,
I will say we sometimes don't. Like, we all know the obvious, like, oh my God, I'm so stressed out. My head feels like it's going to explode. Like, it's just, my nervous system is whacked out. We all get that. Sometimes I think we do, we confuse um, stress for energy. Like, if we're getting up like a shot out of a gun out of bed, and our days go until 11 at night, and we think we're the Energizer Bunny, often what that is just stress energy. We're stressed and it's driving us, and we just don't know how to stop. So I think that
mm,
that's one thing. And another thing that we don't always recognize is stress, is this feeling of being trapped in a life we don't really want to be living.
mm,
So, just if we're going through our day going, oh God, this again, we may not recognize that as stress, but that's what that is. That's the effect that has on the body. Cortisol will come up a little bit. And that's not to say that we aren't going to go through, that there's a way to live life with no difficulty. That doesn't seem possible. But if we're doing these things in our lives that our hearts are not into, they're not on board with, that really affects our physiology. There was a wonderful TED talk by Kelly McGonigal years ago about stress, and she was a stress researcher, and she'd been telling people forever, oh, stress causes disease. And then she looked at these studies and realized stress only causes problems if we think it causes problems. So, because the physiology of stress is very different than the physiology of courage. And it's a beautiful TED talk. And so you learn in that and in other places that stress constricts the vessels of the heart and the body. And so the heart starts pounding, but the vessels are constricting, and it increases the heart rate and blood pressure, and it's problematic over time. Whereas the physiology of courage is really different. The heart starts pounding more, but the vessels open up. It's an opening instead of a shutting down. And so she talks about, when you're in a stressful situation, just see it as an opportunity for courage, and your body can just open and recognize that it's preparing for something good. But what I've found is your body has to be on board with that. You can't talk your body into the physiology of courage if it's really not something you think is worth doing or worth living, or it's not a life you want to be living, or a project you really want to be doing. You can't talk your body into seeing or into galvanizing around the physiology of courage, because it won't work. It's trying to talk your body into, it's gaslighting your body. It's saying, oh, don't see this as stressful, see this as an opportunity for courage. It doesn't work unless your heart is in it, unless that innermost essence is behind it. But if you check in with the innermost essence and you get a yes, this is the right thing to do, even if it's hard, that's something your body can galvanize around, because it recognizes your heart is in it. So
yeah, it's the warrior heart, it's the courageous heart. And I guess what I sometimes notice, well, living in London or a international modern city, is that we're talking about women, a lot of people are locked out of understanding their intuition, or, thinking very practically, and locked out of their dreams and things like that. I mean, this is a very broad question, or I guess, what is your maybe piece of wisdom for people that are so far away from their soul? And you've spoken about this a lot, about just taking that one slow step and checking in, and I think that practice will illuminate itself, won't it?
yeah, Natalie, I think so. I
Mm.
think that's it. And I think it's worth having compassion for ourselves, because our whole lives, our prana, our life force, has been lining up behind where we're focused. And we're focused externally all the time, hearing things, seeing things through our senses, our organs of senses. We're speaking, we're listening, we're smelling, we're tasting, we're engaged through our organs of senses externally all the time. And so it
Mm.
really takes a monumental effort to quiet that down. And so to just start in some practice of pratyahara or another, bringing that awareness in, shutting out the stimulus, the sensory stimulus.
Mm. And I guess, where do you see maybe your practice going, or where do you see, well, since women's health has evolved so much since you mentioned 1901, and particularly now with technology and so forth, what are you seeing and excited about? So we need to be excited, because there is hope.
Yeah. Well, where my practice is going and what I'm excited about in terms of how that's going, I think it's useful for me to contextualize this within the 4 stages of life that they talk about in India. So briefly, if a lifespan is 100 years, the first 25 are about being a student and learning Dharma, learning how to listen to that innermost essence and move through the world in alignment with that. And the second stage of life is grahasta, a householder, where we're grasping, graha is grasp, where we're grasping the artha, the things of life that make us feel secure, a house, a spouse, kids, a job, prestige, this kind of thing. And then in the third stage of life, from roughly 50 to 75, is the vanaprastha, the forest dweller stage of life, where we're getting to address kama, the desires that we've had that we haven't been able to attend to yet. But especially during that time, being able to retreat into the forest, literal or metaphorical forest, like away from the activities and the relationships and um, the worldly work that we've been doing, pulling our awareness back from that and retreating into the forest more, doing more pratyahara practice and more, and coming out and sharing what we've learned in those first 2 stages of life and going back into the forest, and coming out and sharing what we've learned and going back into
Mm.
the forest, and having this kind of inhale, exhale rhythm. And then the fourth stage of life is sannyas, where that's related to moksha, the liberation from attachment, and which is can be extremely liberating and joyous. And so, for me, in terms of what I'm excited about where my practice is going, I'm entering this vanaprastha phase of life, and very, very excited about it. Would never want to go back. And I do want to say to all you women listening, or men too, it gets better. If you're in your 30s or 40s and you're going, oh my God, what the heck? It gets better. It really can get better. And the letting go, this vanaprastha, letting go, learning more how to let go and let go and let go of the clutching, of the striving, of the thriving. Well, not thriving, but the driving for sure, and the striving, letting go of the attachments little by little, letting those melt away. It's very liberating.
And I think that's really nice that you spoke about that letting go, and it gets better, because nobody really hears this actually, particularly in a world that is bombarded with anti-aging, doom and gloom. As you get old, you're losing it. And so that's so inspiring to hear that it does get better.
Oh,
um,
I would never go back, Natalie. I mean, really, really. I mean, if you keep doing things the same way, it
mm,
doesn't probably get better. But if we really can participate with this change of life and what is being asked of us internally, and if we keep practicing that before we hit this, like in the Grahasta stage of life, in that busy kids, professions, all that busyness stage of life, if we can continue, if we can understand this is not always going to be the way it is, how can I prepare myself for the next stage? How can I let go of attachment to this particular situation? Keep working with it wholeheartedly, but without attachment as much as possible. That can help prepare us for that next stage. And then that it really can get so much better. Really, really, really.
mm. Thank you. Yeah, we have to remind ourselves that we are here to celebrate life. We have this soul in our bodies that is here to evolve and practice and participate and grow, and things die and rebirth, and we're connected with the whole ecosystem within us and these senses. So I really love that practice, and I think that's the most important thing that our listeners can do, because with our home, and I loved that piece of, you can't balance your hormones if you're in this chaotic state. So it really goes back to that you are the temple that that you're constantly listening to, and it has all the answers for you. And it's just those micro small steps. It's not big changes and things like that. So before, if I can ask you a couple of quick questions that we ask all of our guests. Now, I'm sure we've covered a lot of these, but it's good just to see what's the first thing that comes from your soul. So tell me how you live in rhythm.
By listening to that innermost essence to the best of my ability at any moment that I remember.
Mm. And do you have any cheat days? And if you do, what do you do?
Mm-hmm. I think that if I'm listening to my innermost essence, then things that look like cheats are not cheats.
I love
They're
that.
the right thing to happen at that moment. So the rules look like they've gone out the window, but they haven't if the only rule is listen to the innermost essence to the best of my ability. Then if it says, shut everything down for today and go out for coffee, it's not a cheat day. It's continuing to listen to the innermost essence. It just looks like a cheat day.
Mm. And what do you do on those days that everyone around you is just irritating you, or you have a shorter fuse than normal? How do you come back to balance on those days?
I try to remember and recognize that it's not them, it's me. And that I need to withdraw and have some time alone to connect with that innermost essence and be watered by it, because that innermost essence is not just Dear Abby. It's not just going to tell me what to do. It's going to nurture me. It's really going to nurture me and give me a higher threshold of tolerance.
And what is one statement you say to motivate your girlfriends?
I don't know. I don't think I ever try to motivate somebody. Just kind of share what's going on in my own innermost essence. Listen to where they are. Yeah, just think it's more of a listening. I think it's just a listening, staying in my innermost essence and listening, because I don't know whether they need motivation or relaxation. And I don't know what they need. I don't know what anybody needs. So it's more of a listening.
Thank you. Is there any final thoughts? Or, I mean, there's a lot of beautiful things and there's a common thread here, but is there any further takeaways or a leaving mantra for our listeners?
Well, let's just go back to those words of my guru. Keep walking while doing the remembrance, and the destination will come to you by itself.
And so it is. That's beautiful. Wow. Thank you so much, Dr. Welch, for your time, for your, I know you don't want to call it your legacy, but your life force or your light guiding so many of us and women and your creation. So I appreciate your time and your essence. And absolutely, everybody needs to at least look at the course and your resources, because your website is incredible knowledge for somebody that has been practicing for a long time. So thank you.
Thank you so much for your life force and essence and spirit, Natalie. This has really been beautiful.
Thank you.